All right, so we're going to go into to relations, and we're going to kind of spend, hopefully not a hour and 20 minutes like last time, but pretty much the entire block. We may get into one sketch to kind of move it forward, but like I said, because the amount of videos out on the YouTube channel are available, I'm not so feeling so much pressure to do the sketches or to discuss each of the sketches. So I do want to spend a little time on the relations, and relations are our foundation piece. So we're going to go back into the part. In the coming weeks, we're going to create the custom templates. So we'll see those kind of change. Until then, we can do just the standard template. Probably the one thing that I'm used to seeing or that I would turn on is my origins. So going up to the little arrow next to the pull down on the eyeball, what's it called? Look for my tooltip. Oh, the hide all types, visibility. Do the origin, and then the view sketch relations will be turned off. Those are what's going to take over your drawing and be kind of a nuisance. For a small sketch, just getting started out, the sketch relations are fine, but very quickly there are more green dots than there are objects in your sketch. So we'll turn that one off, and then when we highlight something, it will come up with the relations and give us the feedback immediately. All right, so the reason I turn the origin on is this little blue dot is also giving me another indicator, one of those visual references that says I am either in a sketch or I'm not in a sketch. All right, but I can do rotation and see it move along with the reference triad in the bottom left corner. And when I go to Control 1 on the keyboard, and that was what I forgot to scan. Note to self: scan the hotkey list. So I'll put up a hotkey list from the local local engineering group that hosts the SolidWorks users group meetings. And they had a really nice line card type deal with the hotkeys, so we'll put that up, or I'll find a place for it, or scan it and put it in at the end of the video. So the blue dot as opposed to a red dot. If I am inside of the sketch, this is going to turn red, so there's that kind of immediate recognition that I am in a sketch or I'm not in a sketch. My personal preference is to pre-select. Question before class was, do you always have to draw on the front plane? No, you pick what is convenient, what makes sense. I always call it the magic crystal ball of design intent, that when this goes over into the assembly, I'm looking into that future use of this part. And if I can draw it, if I can create the part, the model, in the orientation that it's going to roughly be in inside of the assembly, I've saved myself a step. It doesn't take any longer to draw this on the front plane than the top plane. It's just a matter of making that choice and saying, I think the orientation will be when it gets to the assembly, and then, yeah, 50-50 shot at it. You're going to be right or wrong, and most of the time you're going to be right, getting it into that location. All right, so let's go with the top plane so you can see the difference. So I am a pre-select on the feature tree and go into the sketch. Otherwise, jumped over to Expert, but under the Sketch tab, if you just click Sketch, it's going to ask you, what do you want to sketch in? And then I can pick the top plane. It shows me that graphic rotation. So inside of my options up here, there is a checkbox that we're going to get to that says rotate into position when I go into a sketch. So selecting a plane or a face, it'll rotate into that position and put me into that orientation automatically. Now, it doesn't really matter if it, let's see, I'm going to do the Alt and left arrow key and rotate around. It doesn't really matter that I'm upside down and kind of backwards on my origin in particular cases. I'm still not thinking in terms of X and Y. This is not a coordinate system that I often use the terminology X and Y. This is horizontal and vertical. So short leg is horizontal, long leg is always vertical. So control 1 puts me into the front plane. I'm drawing in the top plane. So that little blue arrow is my part origin, right? Not the sketch origin. So when I'm out of position, I can have that frame of reference shift to where, oh, I was drawing in the top, I hit a control 1 or a control 2, and until I get to control 5, I'm not back into my sketch plane. Control 6 reverses it around, and I can see that blue origin kind of whipping around, but when I get over to control 7 in the isometric, then I am going to go see all three. I'm going to see the vertical component of the part. The horizontal component of the part is in line with the horizontal component of the sketch, and really I'm only concerned with, at this stage, that red arrow. So I go back to control 5 because I'm in the top plane, or control 1 if you're sketching in the front plane, picking up each of those items. All right, so our most common element is going to be the line or the arc circle. So I would say out of that group, probably the line. If it's a cylindrical shape, if it has some additional geometry in it, there's a crossover where I have to make a decision if this is purely cylindrical, at what point do I do a revolve as opposed to an extrude. Okay, well that's a discussion for the features, but it is going to drive some of my decision tree to generate these sketches and get it started. So we started with, last week with just creating some simple line geometry. I'm not real concerned with orientation, as sketched, horizontal, vertical, angle, for construction, infinite length, and midpoint line. Out of that group, when we start looking at construction lines and symmetry and revolution, the revolved bodies, then I would probably pick horizontal and vertical and infinite length, making sure that for construction was checked. The difference between object geometry and construction geometry is that checkbox. Other than that, it's all geometry, right? I can make my object geometry construction geometry and my construction geometry object geometry. They are interchangeable. All right. I may start out drawing, instead of going to the line, I may do the pull down and go to center line. Center line and for construction, why they couldn't pick one and leave it, I don't know. But a center line and for construction are the exact same thing. They are the same, different terminology. They do the exact same thing. All right. If I take in and draw a line and I check for construction, it turns into a center line. It turns into a construction line. If I draw a center line and want to switch it back to object geometry, I select unselect for construction. It becomes object geometry. It's just a toggle. All right, we kind of get hung up on this terminology because there is a little bit of a mismatch there. They're the same things. All right, so since I clicked in the work area, I get my line. So I'm just going to click, and I'm going to escape. I think the other one's A. I don't ever right-click and find out what the other hotkey is to terminate the line and stay in the command. I usually just hit escape and go to the next object. So this line is able to move in all different directions. We have no relation, no existing relation, and depending on what I select, that will determine how it moves. All right, so if I grab the endpoint, I'm rubber banding that endpoint. The other one stays stationary. I grab the line, the line element, the object between the 2 points, then it's pretty much going to move. I would have thought it would move where I wanted it to, but I guess it's moving parallel to the direction of the line. So I don't do that very much because my intent is to draw these lines in the orientation in my view. That's my internal picture of what this is going to look at. Like, not very often do we need to drag the lines like this, but it is available. We can shrink it to nothing, and that is the be careful, because a little dot like that, if we're far enough out, that will cause my sketch to remain underdefined because it is an unattached, undimensioned, unrelated dot out in space. And they do happen to where something gets thrown or in your selection that this would have almost no. So we're still at, and I'm going to do something I don't normally do and shrink it down a little bit. But that little bit of line, that little dot will cause you to remain underdefined if you can't identify it, if it gets lost in the other sketches, if there's other object geometry on top of it. So it's kind of one of those, while you're pushing buttons, just, there's going to be a lot of things that are running in the background that you're consciously going to have to observe and consciously going to focus on before you pick up the process, and it becomes kind of one of those subconscious acknowledgments that, oh, I just clicked something and I'm not sure what it did. I need to go check right away. Not wait until the sketch won't be underdefined. Find out what it did. Since I changed the parameters, I'll go ahead and make my comment on parameters. I can define parameters, and if you're coming from an Autodesk, AutoCAD background, you may have or want the tendency to put in all of this information. Don't bother. Please, please don't bother. This information to me is feedback. I want to know where this is at, but watch what happens. I'll go -1, 2 inches, 4 inches, 3 inches. The deltas will change the direction. There, I put in everything, and I still have an underdefined sketch. I still have underdefined endpoints and underdefined object line. Those parameters will put you into position. If you know that position and you need that position, fine, use it. But if you do this on every one of your objects, you're going to make this program miserable. It is going to be a royal pain because we are freeform sketch, parametric. The relations and the dimensions drive the in product, our geometry, our objects. Those relations, those dimensions are the driving force. All right, parameters don't mean anything to me other than, hey, I want to check how long that line turned out. Oh, that's almost 5.1 inches. Great, I'm done. Absolutely, in this case, do not fix. So what fix does is, if I fix the object, and I'm gonna show you the indicators so that you will be able to recognize it. But fix is a last resort option and very rare cases. 1/10 of 1% of the time is when you will make a conscious decision to fix. All right, so if I fix this line, endpoints are still blue, they can still move. I've set up the vector, I've set up the direction of that line. I haven't defined it. So let's see, undo, undo, undo. So rather than fixing the object, I can grab the two endpoints and I'll go ahead up to the pop-up and make fixed. Well, that actually did something. That fixed the two endpoints, which by definition in geometry, that also fixed the line. All right, the problem is, how do I change it? My parameters, well, let's see. I haven't tried this and I'm out on a wing, so 6, 7, keeps reverting back to. Fix did just what it was supposed to. It locked that in, and now to move it, I've got to go identify that relation. I've got to get rid of it. Now I can change the one endpoint. I can do whatever I need to do. And because I still haven't applied relation, still haven't applied a dimension, I have to fix it again. Any change on a multi-object part that I have fixed and fixed all of the objects, I just cringe at the thought. It's a nightmare scenario. I've seen entire projects where the relations and the dimensions were not understood, and it was the most miserable project to change anything, to make revisions, to do anything. In a lot of the cases, I would go into display delete relations. I would find everything that was fixed and delete all. Oh yeah, and where you see delete all, since you got both of them, it went away. But be careful with delete all because it means exactly what it says. Everything in that box goes away. So I'm going to delete and delete, and then I would have better luck on anything that I was going to revise, going back through and saying, okay, this is going to be horizontal, this is going to be related, or if it was already in a position, rather than changing its position, I could put a dimension on it, I could relate it to some piece of geometry elsewhere and start tying it together. But that's a long, tedious repair process, and at engineering rates, it's an expensive process. How bad do you want to fix your part, or do you want me to fix your part? I would prefer you fix your part since you know how it works. It's your strategy. Okay, so when you pick strategies and you're committing to fixed, it's going to end up misery is the only word that I can come up with for it. So don't fix. First relation that I'm showing you, don't use it. All right, so I went in ahead and did the horizontal. At least I think I did, and I can verify that it showed up under the existing relations. I can verify that its sketch relation showed up with the object. And the main difference between that sketch relations icon is this will be on all of the time, not just when I select it. I would rather see it when I select the geometry rather than having it on during everything. All right, so still free to move. Can do all sorts of rubber banding and changing of the geometry, but it will not come off of horizontal because this relation now has priority. If I try to add a vertical, get the nice red dot, you just overdefined. One of these has priority. Which one? You don't get both. So Control Z will come out of vertical. And a lot of times what will happen is I will lose my frame of reference and think that, oh, wow, I really needed to make that vertical. Well, my origin says that, no, that's still horizontal. I'm looking at it in a different perspective, looking at it in different orientation. Still horizontal. Not going to get away from it. And if I go Control 8, normal to the sketch, that's going to bring it back into that orientation and help me kind of decipher some of that information. So horizontal, vertical, let's go ahead and draw another line, and we'll throw in the vertical. Oh, and it's another one of those finger habit things that I draw the line, I look for the little yellow box, and I get vertical automatically. So that was an inferred relation. If I miss a little bit, one way or the other, not a big deal. I can always go back and add it. I'm not going to have to undo, delete, and then redraw it. I just have to select the object and apply the next relation to it. Okay. So horizontal, vertical, very common. And next will be coincident. So if I drag my endpoint and I drag it to another endpoint, it's going to show me, in this case, a concentric. So I said coincident, but the endpoints are going to show concentric. When I drop it, well, they're going to move together, but notice I did not get a relation. So kind of jumping around a little bit, but in effect, this did a merge. And it would have the same effect as if I drew the other line out here, and I were to Control Select the two endpoints. So first time I introduced, I'm introducing the Control Select. So let's run through that real quick. Primary function of your index finger is to hold down the Control button. So when I say Select Control Select, I select the first object, in this case the endpoint. I hold down the Control button, I select the next endpoint, and we have a merge. Merge does not produce a visible existing relation. It just combines, it just merges the two endpoints, and there you go. So if I wanted to unmerge them, I would have to delete one of the objects. I would have to split one of the objects. I would have to trim one of the objects to separate those items. All right, so it's not a big deal. Usually the merge happens seamlessly in the background. You don't even really pay any attention to it. But when you consciously pick the two endpoints and say merge, then, again, I can select on that endpoint, no relation. It's the same as if I went through the click and all of the endpoints are automatically merged, or I do the click drag and I select midpoints. It's just happening in the background, and most of the time it does not present any issues. So it's just kind of be aware that that there is something going on there. All right, but it's not a big deal. All right, so let's go ahead and drag to the origin. And most of the time I'm going to pick drag over select control select. Right, because with the drag, I'm grabbing an endpoint, and things can move a little strange as long as they don't completely invert and twist and I haven't gotten too far along. Then I can drag something back to the origin, and it doesn't necessarily need to be an endpoint. But as soon as I see my little yellow box that says this is going to be coincident, or I choose to do the select control select, in which case I would have coincidence, or if I pick on the line, I would have the midpoint, or the other endpoint. Basically those are my choices, and it doesn't have to be the horizontal. Go ahead and pick the midpoint of the vertical. It's whatever makes sense to you, the way that you see it, the way that you visualize it, the way that you're progressing through and making your decisions in this part. That part, there are no rules. It's the way you see it. And you'll either say, yay, it worked out fine, or man, I'm not ever going to do that again. And those are kind of the two choices. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and in this case, we'll drag to the origin. Okay, I'll back up and I'll do the control select, and we'll just go coincident. They have the same function. If I can select the endpoint and drag, then it's going to be a little bit faster than the select control select and picking the object. So notice what happens. My vertical and my horizontal went to black. I still have the blue line here that's able to go any direction. The blue endpoint still says I can move up and down, I can invert, I can do whatever I really want to do. Okay, back and forth, over to the side, because the combination of I am attached to the origin, I am related vertical, or I am related horizontal, those objects are now positioned. They have enough information that 3 out of the 4 components, all right, one endpoint, the object line itself, has enough information that it won't move by itself. The second endpoint, that we have to work on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over to P1-2 so that we have something to relate to. And I don't know what my scale is. I'm not sure where because since I'm just kind of sketching, so I'm going to end up with a box that is 4 by 2.5. So I'm going to go ahead with a horizontal. It moves to position. Not a big deal. I'm going to grab its endpoint and bring it back over, and then I'm looking for that blue inference line. So the blue line on the left is showing me where it was at. All right, so in relation to where I'm going, that was where it was at. And the dash blue inference line is telling me that I am at a location that is above the endpoint of the bottom line. So it didn't apply a relation, it just said you're there. And if I go back into line and connect those 2 dots, then I'm seeing the little yellow box that is showing me concentric, which is really a merge, and the vertical line that it will add a relation, as opposed to the coincident to the merge, which it just merged the endpoints. You got what you got. Okay, so now that these are connected up, they're still free to move. All right, I can rubber band this anywhere I want to go. And relations include dimensions. I often separate them, but in effect, a dimension is a relation. So we said we were going to be 2.5 by 4. And my dimensions showing up in purple are a decision that I made inside of the options. And we'll talk about that when we go through the setting up the options and why I would pick purple over black in the dimensions. All right, but there's a pretty good reason. So, all right, so that's not necessarily everything that we can do with lines. What's my other favorite is probably collinear. So let's go ahead and throw collinear into the mix before I get too far. So I'm going to come out here somewhere and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. And just go back to right click and select is one way to get out of it. Otherwise hit the keyboard, escape on the keyboard. And then if I select the line and control select another line, I will get this thing called collinear. And that will cause these lines to lay along the same line with or without a gap. What I don't want to do is kind of lose one line under the other. That would cause the sketch to remain underdefined because I have that duplicate entity. It would also cause this to be a contour and region even though my intention wasn't a contour and region. So we're going to pick up contour and region in the features, but it's two conditions that you need to be aware of. All right, and when you see them, because at some point it's a given that you are going to push enough buttons, you are going to have enough geometry that this instance will occur. And the trick is to identify the blue endpoints, or if they got related, then really the worst case scenario is that I'm going to have to delete objects one at a time until I find the one that's a duplicate entity. So as far as I know, even though I think I put in an enhancement request a while back, if not, it's time to put in another one. Under the tools and sketch tools was to delete duplicate entities. Most all CAD programs have something to remove something that is on top of something else, or at least be able to identify it. All right, so that's collinear. And I'm going to Control Z back to the start of that line. So we'll watch it jump here. Oh, that's okay. So collinear has the same net effect as an endpoint and the line being coincident. Okay, so coincidence. And it moves the same way. It has the same thing. So we can equate those as if for some reason collinear may not work, then I would be looking to see if the lines were not parallel or were not capable of becoming parallel. Otherwise, I would go to the endpoint and the line and pick the coincidence. All right, so 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's, again, what you see or what you recognize. Collinear from the design perspective, most of the time makes more sense. I'm making those two objects share the same line infinitely. All right, so if I stretch this out, I zoomed way out and I stretched that out. It doesn't matter how big it gets, it's going to stay collinear. All right, so there are certainly more things that we'll encounter as we go along with the object lines. So let's take a quick look at the circles, and since I have some geometry to play with here, the click and drag, and let's go ahead and put another one. Oh, okay, maybe not. We'll put another one out here for future reference. So for the circles, we pretty much have two entities or two elements of our object that we're going to work from: the center point and the perimeter or the circumference, depending on how you want to define it. So if I want to relate the position, I'm going to select the center point, and then it can go coincident. I now have, well, I got the distance. Maybe it's on that one. Nope. So it might have merged that one too, I'm not sure. So let's go midpoint. All right, so I know I got a midpoint there. So that relation shows up because I inferred. I went to the yellow midpoint box. I dropped it on the center point of the circle onto the yellow midpoint box. That infers the new relation. Okay, so we come back. Again, if I'm grabbing the perimeter, then that is going to be a size, except in the case where I go in and I start to say tangency. And if I make this tangents to 3 lines, I'm going to end up with 3 positions, 3 locations on the arc, on the circle, and that is enough to define the circle. So what I need for a circle definition is going to be again, 99.999% of the time is the center point location and a radius or a diameter. Very rarely, occasionally, I will use the 3-point, which is the perimeter circle, and it shows 3 points on that circle to define its location. Maybe I don't know where the center point is because it's coming up tangent to a tangent to a tangent. All right, that's doable. All right, so in this case, let's go with the other example, and I'm going to go 1/2 inch, and I still have to find out why that's showing the mod diameter, but not a big deal. I'm going to go 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. And then when I place the radius, 0.25, or I'm sorry, the diameter, 0.25, it updates, it gives me a position, I have its horizontal and vertical location, and I have its diameter. That is enough to define its position and its size. All right, so let's back up out of that one. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. And when we're picking the arcs or the circles, then select Control Select, and going to tangent, we'll go to that point. And depending on the size and how far I drag away, then it will rotate anywhere around the perimeter of the other circle because it has priority because it's defined. The 3 tangency points are saying this cannot move, this can. If I go in and I put that dimension, no, I have the center point selected. So watch that the center point, because there is kind of a pre-select. I go back and tell this that it's 1 inch. If I have the center point selected, it's not going to be able to define to the center point unless I pick another object. So now instead of it kind of changing size, that dimension is saying stay the same size, but I'm still able to rotate, or I'm able to stay in contact at that tangency point with the other circle. Let's go ahead and undo one more time. So within a sketch, you would not use, in the case of circles, you would not use co-radial. We're going to end up with duplicate entities. Okay, so we're going to see an application of co-radial, but the first in the list and the first in the list over here is co-radial. So there it is, it's co-radial. I now have 2 circles, one on top of the other, and I really can't tell that they're there. So I'm right back in that same condition as 2 lines where, oh, showing fully defined. I'm not sure why it's showing fully defined, but I believe, well, we're already in contact. So let's do that, that conversion, and I'm going to select my object line so that I can verify. I'm going to switch over to for construction if I can see it. That's hiding underneath my timestamp. So I'm going to right click on the object, and the second row, second item is the little arrows. We'll switch that over to center lines or construction lines, however you like to call them. And with one object on top of the other, let's go ahead and try to extrude it. It does not automatically go to extrude, even though I think I only have 1 object. No, I have 2 objects there because I made them co-radial. And so this is where the selected contouring region comes in and says you have to pick. what do you want? And the center lines are not valid. And in most cases, we'll do a quick comparison. Control Z, no, probably didn't want to do that one. Oh well, we'll pick it up here in a minute. All right, so let's see if I delete one, but that's showing the tangencies. Notice it took the one that I really wanted with all the relations, so that was nice of it. So let's undo. And the relations are still showing up, so let's try the undo. So I can get back out of it without losing the relations on the circle that I did actually want. All right. So rather than doing the select control select, we also have this thing called select chain. So pay attention when you're doing these right mouse button clicks and looking down through. You're going to have the relations. You're going to have some basic tools. The dimension command is pretty good. Why they put exit sketch right next to the smart dimension, but this is another one of those. When we customize, I can customize that out of my way. Really, construction geometry, not so much select other, some of these other items, and then go directly into the extruded boss base. Or select chain will say, grab everything that's connected to that line. And then I can right click and go to for construction and go to the extrude, and I see the preview and can drag the arrow, and because these are not nested, and they're not connected, I will end up with two bodies. All right. Also, discussion for the features, extrudes and revolves. But just be aware that when you see these two items, they're going to generate two bodies. All right. So we're not ready for that one just yet. Let's see, what else can we do with circles? So watch out for the co-radial in circles. In arcs, we're going to be able to use co-radial in certain instances. So it's there for a reason. It's not completely useless. Let's see. So if I did want to make these concentric, I can drag, and as long as I drag over the edge of the circle, I'm going to see its four quadrants. So horizontal, vertical, and coincident to the circle, or coincident to the center point of the circle I'm dragging to. The other would be to, if I'm selecting the perimeters, we had the co-radial, we had the tangent, we had the concentric. That's going to have the same net effect as the center points. So a lot of times it's try the center point of the circle or the arc, and then if it's not effective, then grab the perimeter. All right, but most of the time the center point. And then as far as dimensioning, when we go to dimension, pick the perimeter, or in the case of the perimeters, if I want this to be a thickness, a wall thickness, then I can go perimeter to perimeter, and it's going to give me that separation, that wall thickness. If I want something different, then I'm going to have to change it. So whatever the dimension is, that's fine. And under all of the dimensions, we can look at the values. We can look at the text, but really I'm not interested in putting a lot of text into the part. This would be something that I would add to the drawing under the drawing detail dimension. So I'll go back to the statement I made a bunch of times, is you are going to sketch for convenience. You're going to generate your parts in a way that makes sense, that the design intent says, in the future, in the assembly, I may have to grow in this direction, I may have to grow in the horizontal direction, grow both horizontal and vertical. In that case, I want dimensions that will assist me in doing that, not necessarily the dimensions that are geared toward, focused on manufacturing. So going over to the leaders, since I picked both of those, really not getting, so if I go to the outside, that's kind of the arrows. That doesn't help me. Document display, no. All right, so because I picked the two circles, I have locked it into basically that width, that thickness. All right, so my choice here is to delete it, and then I would pick each one individually if I wanted to control them separately. Oh, well, I'm also in the condition that those three tangencies are now overwriting, and I've selected in my settings to not show me the warning for over-defining condition, just go ahead and take that dimension and make it driven. So under Other, I have a driven checkbox, and that driven checkbox is now the three tangencies have a higher priority than the dimension. I can say that this dimension is for reference or something that I want to see, but it is not something that I can modify or change because it's driven. Right? So those are some important ones to be aware of. And then the inside, we could go to 1.25, and then it has its dimension relation and no driven. All right, so there are times where I'm going to make decisions. I may have what-if scenarios where I'm not sure if I want the relations or the dimension to be the priority, or multiple dimensions to be the priority, in which case I can switch out driven for non-driven and cycle through them to see what scenario is going to work best. So that's kind of an advanced thing, getting into the logic and the background of the dimensions. But it is one of those, maybe I want to keep this and have it there for visual, and then be able to switch back and forth depending on my conditions. All right, so unsaved. I'm going to make the, and again, more things that we can do with the circles. But I'm going to make those go away for now, and we'll look at the arcs. I go back to the select chain and then right click again and change that back to object geometry. So for our arcs, and let's see, we haven't had to rotate, we haven't done too much with the mouse yet, so we'll come back to those. We have the center point arc, and if I go into the command and decided I really wanted it to be a tangent arc, I can click on the next box. I can cycle through, and I want to say, is it A? Yeah, so hitting A on the keyboard will cycle you through the three selections as well. Tangent is the one that has to have existing geometry. It has to have an arc. It has to have a line. It has to have an endpoint to connect to. So even a spline is functional for a tangent arc. Otherwise, we're going to do center, drag in a certain direction. If it doesn't go the direction or generate the geometry the way you want, keep going, bring it around, go the other way, find the solution that you're looking for. Let's go ahead over to, since I was doing the click drag, it didn't continuous, but I can I can go to the 3-point arc, and 3-point, just what it says. I pick the start point, the end point, and then I see the dashed line. The dashed line says you need to do one more thing. Describe this arc. Drag it to some location and let it go. Now it is an object. Up until the point that I drag it and it becomes an object, it is just inferred. It's waiting on you to make that drag and show what it's going to look like. Okay. So since we started off with co-radial on the circles, let's go ahead and do co-radial on the arcs. So I did a select, control, select. When I go co-radial, now I have the gaps, and maybe this is a portion of an arc connected to another arc. Co-radial says in this instant they share the center, so they're concentric, and they also share the same diameter, the same radius. So as one moves and gets bigger, the other one will too.
So why did it select that circle to be co-radial, or that arc to be co-radial, and not the other one?
Probably the order that I selected them in. I have to go back and verify every time I get that question, but usually the last one that I selected becomes the stationary, and the previous arcs all follow the last one. So if there is intent, and that one, I didn't go back far enough. So let's go ahead and select that one first and test the theory. All right, try again. and go concentric. That one moves in relation to that one. Oh, sorry, I did concentric. Go radial. And if I had 10 arcs lined up, the last one should be the one that's stationary, and all of the other 9 should move co-radial to the last one, as far as the logic. You may go try to do that at some point, and it will not quite work that way. I don't always trust it, but I do expect it. All right, so those are sharing the same. We go to the tangency, so arc and arc, and go to tangency. It's just shifting its position a little bit. Same thing. Selected first, selected second. When I drag this out, I'm going to be looking at those tangency locations. And when we get to a point to where the endpoint and the other arc go to coincident, then that is my tangency point. And if I bring this up and go to the concentric, I'm back to a merge. I'm not going to see an existing relation. They flashed the concentric, but it merged. All right, so it's not. I'm kind of making a big deal out of the merge. It's a natural process. It's there, and we really aren't concerned about it. It's just what's going on in the background and what you're going to get. What else did we have with the arcs? Let's go ahead and grab both of those. Making them equal. Okay, so circles, lines. Let's go ahead and get rid of these 2 dimensions so that we can see the equal. So when I select Control Select, all right. So in this case, I selected the big arc last. So we're going to see if I make it equal. Nah, didn't matter with equal. So it's not a case where it's always going to be the last one that you select that stays. Whatever's running in the background, whatever the logic is, one of them will be equal to the other when you're done. Same with our lines. Now, by virtue of the horizontal and vertical relations, I shouldn't have to make all of these equal, just one set, and that's going to make the square. So the difference in the dimension is going to be that whichever one I pick, and it happened to pick that because one of the lines was pre-selected, is now going to drive the square based on the equality between those 2 lines. Let's go back, Control Z. Oh, I'm not going to get my dimensions back. Oh, they're there. Didn't go back far enough. Let's see, anything else in here? Equal curve length is kind of interesting. This one's been added in the probably 2015, 2016. Curve length, and under the dimensions, path length dimension. Those are kind of specialty cases, but if I wanted this arc length, this sector length, to be exactly 2 inches, I have that capability. And then once I make it 2 inches, if I want those to be equal, then I can set equal curve length, even though they have at this point different radiuses. I can make them follow that dimension. So that is my 2 endpoints. And there again, my fingers were ahead of my mouth, so let's run through that again. I'm going to select the 2 endpoints, and then lastly, I'm going to select the curve. And under Smart Dimension, I'm going to go to the path length dimension. Did I do that backwards? End-to-end coincident to form a single chain. Oh, so it's going to have to be all of it. So let's go ahead and put in a simpler case of the arc. Nope, that's still not what I wanted. There we go. And then we'll see if I can make the other one work. So path length, endpoint. Okay, got the arc. Okay, that changed. Path length dimension. I'm so used to pre-selecting that I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Well, maybe it does need both. Okay, maybe they changed it for 2017 and I haven't caught up to it. I'm going to have to come back to that one. So that would have been a great question for Stump the Professor. All right, it's one of those things when I do it and I'm not thinking about it, it works a lot better. So because I stopped and thought about it, I'm going to have to go figure it out. All right, but there is a way to say that this path length or these arcs form that dimension. So we'll get rid of those. What else? Pretty much what we drew with the single lines can be done with the rectangle. So corner rectangle is corner to corner, and center rectangle is to include construction lines, and the construction lines can go from corners or from midpoints. And since I already applied that one, I may not get midpoints. All right, so your choice as to whether you want it to go midpoint to midpoint, corner to corner. And then the others are for 3-point, pretty much parallelograms, or the out of position, and then the parallelogram. So we'll deal with those later, since the objects are going to infer relations. The inference is that when you draw a rectangle, you will get 2 horizontals, 2 verticals. And then at any particular time, if I decide that I want to manipulate, I can delete one relation and make it a little bit off. I can change the angle, I can get those 4 lines in, get that geometry in, and then shift it pretty quickly. Okay, let's go back to the corner rectangle. And we can either highlight it, and on the existing relations you can right click and delete, or when you see the little green boxes, all right, so green box says I'm showing you the relation for that object. I'm hovering over it, so it's orange, and it's highlighting the object in magenta, saying these two are connected. And then when I highlight, actually click on the sketch relation and it goes to blue, it's available to hit delete on the keyboard, or I think you can right click. All right, so I hit the Control Z, right click, and delete. And then once it's deleted, now it's free to move, while the others are not. So a lot of times what I'll do when I'm creating a tab geometry is I'll just go ahead and draw the rectangle, go into the tangent arc, and then because I really don't care that much, I'm just going to make that construction geometry and it can stay there. And I have my little tombstone shape that generates that geometry or does whatever I need it to do, and then it's capable of becoming whatever geometry I need from there. All right, so we're going to finish out our sketch. Again, this is meant to be a real quick get into the relations, see some of the more common ones, some of the tricks and traps that you're going to run into with those relations, and then we'll just finish out the sketch. Let's see, we don't have very much geometry, so if I do the display delete, notice that under my list of relations, everything in this sketch, horizontal, when I click on one of the horizontals, it shows me the sketch relation and the object. Horizontal, vertical, vertical, so I can go through and I can identify those. So that's kind of a debug trick if you need it, something going on. If there is a underdefined, not solved condition, these will show up in amber, they'll show up in red, they'll show up in yellow, and you can identify. Unfortunately, the one that's showing up in amber, red, or yellow is usually under the first one that's blue, and unless you click something else, you won't really see it. So it's kind of one of those, I know you're there somewhere, I can see over here that I'm having a problem with an overdefined, unsolvable condition. None of the relations are having a problem until you click and, oh, hey, the very first one that was selected, that was highlighted in blue, that was covering it up, thank you very much, is now accessible. All right, so that's kind of another one of those weird cases, but again, debug and identifying why you're having that issue is a big deal of kind of limiting the frustration level, being able to pick out those items. So again, watch out for delete all. Oops, I didn't want that one either. And delete all is just what it said: the horizontals, the verticals, the everythings. Right. So if I'm going to reconstruct this, it might let me undo it to the point, but if I have to reconstruct it, this is also the same condition that I'm going to have to find it. But there is a place under the sketch tools, I believe, sketch settings. There is a no solve mode. Hey, there's the other shaded sketch contours I was looking for that we added the button up here for. But I believe it's no solve mode, which does not add any relations. If that gets turned on or turned off or highlighted or whatever, then you will be sketching, but you will not get any inferences. You will not get that horizontal. You will not get that vertical. It's no solve, right? So that's gonna kick you out. So if I have to reconstruct this from scratch, what is going on in the background is, as we're generating those objects and it is inferring horizontal, it adds horizontal for me. It adds horizontal. It adds vertical. It's saving me in the process of doing that sketching by paying attention to those little yellow boxes. It's doing this job for me. All right, so it doesn't take very long to reconstruct, but this is a rectangle. We get into some of the chapter 2, chapter 3 sketches. This is the last thing I want to be doing. All right, so I reconstruct, and then my last is to, well, maybe for some reason I want this an inch off the origin, and that's going to be a valid solution. So watch out for, let's see, because this went endpoint to endpoint, I'm going to get the angle, which is the length dimension direct from point to point. And if I apply the, oh, no, that wasn't what I wanted. I actually wanted the length dimension to illustrate. So I stay close to that, and then basically it's able to rotate 1.05. So point-to-point dimensioning is the bottom of my list because of this illustration. All right, so watch what happens when I get rid of the length dimension, and instead I say I want a vertical dimension, okay, a horizontal dimension of 1 inch. And this is now capable of moving up and down, but it is not rotating about, I mean, it's not orbiting the origin. And then I can go back and say I want from the origin, oh, got it again because of the pre-select. So 0.75, and now it's in position. All right, so we're always going to have that horizontal, that vertical element, but the length is tricky. Length between 2 points will still allow for that orbit in certain conditions. All right, so for whatever reason, it's off of the origin by 1 inch in the horizontal, 0.75 in the vertical, but it's still fully defined because it's related back to the origin. All right, somehow it is connected and is attached to the origin. All right, so now I've forgotten all my dimensions, so let's jump back over here. We're going to treat this as contours and regions so that we can discuss. I could extrude this out. Now, going into features, this is not a you have to do it a certain way. I could extrude this out. I could draw the 2 circles and extrude it through. I could draw the box and extrude it through. We can draw all the geometry and pick contours and regions. And initially, that's probably what you'll want to do. Coming from a 2D CAD background is generate geometry, but it may not necessarily be what you're expecting or would want to see. So make that one coincident. Oh, I missed all of them. Cool. All right, so that one gets drug coincident. That one gets drug to merge. where 1.5 dimension, or 1.5. And I know in one or two of the videos I used the jog command. Jog is pretty cool, so if you like to see that, there are the tools and the sketch tools and jog, which would create kind of that rectangle and trim it out for me. So let's see, we were 2.5, and there again I can do the math and pick whatever dimensions I think are going to be convenient. I think the whole thing was 1 inch. And as far as leaving the dimensions on the sketch and trying to hold those standards, it's what's convenient. I am going to try and be a little bit careful that I don't end up with everything stacked on top of each other. Probably a no-no, but it's not going to be too bad to drag those out if for some reason they do get bundled up. All right, and then circle, circle. Those were 1/2 inch holes, 0.75 and 2.5 in between. All right, so this is a place where I can use my equal. I want the centers to be horizontal. And then my dimensions will take over. So since those were pre-selected from the relation, I click on the dimension, it goes, well, you must want to be between the center points, but no, actually I don't. So I'm going to undo that one, and yeah. Let's try the redo. I don't redo very often. But by illustration, I go into the leaders, I come down here, and there's no min, max, no nothing. So the reason that I'm going to tell you to go from perimeter to perimeter, circumference to circumference, 2.5, is that it gives me the added of, I really want to see this as a max condition to the outsides, to the min and the max, to the center. And most of the time you're just going to go center to center, but if it's a habit that you get into applying the dimensions to those perimeters, you will always have this available whether you need it or not. The other way, center points to edges, don't get it. So 0.75, 0.75, and what else is moving? So if that one was good. All right, so I'm in diagnostic mode. My center marks aren't moving. I need another relation. I need another dimension. All right, well, I forgot the diameter, but when I drag it, I can see that they're equal. I can see that they're going through. So my diagnostic tool is still in blue. The center points are in black. They're defined. And when I drag something, left click, hold down, and drag, that's my indicator. Oh, okay, I got to put the 1/2 inch on one of them. It doesn't really matter which, because it's going to stay equal. All right, so going over to the feature in this case, because I left this line, I can trim it out, but I don't have to. I could also go into the tools and select split entities and split out that line and turn it into a construction line if I thought I needed to toggle between a notch and no notch. So way too many options. We go into the feature. I pick the boss extrude. It's going to be a blind in condition of 1 inch. And then my contours come down to, if I pick the outside, I'm going to get the box. If I pick just the circles, I can pick just those circles. These are contours. Let's see, if I pick that one, it doesn't really know what to do. It got part of it. So that would be, notice the thin feature came on. Because it's not able to close that off, it went automatically to thin feature. And I'm going to clear all the selections, and we're going to go just for the interior region, right? As opposed to region, region, region. I'm picking the region that I want, and there's going to be times where you're going to select for a contour, times where you're going to select for the region, depending on your ultimate strategy. Okay, so since I still can't say anything in under an hour, I'm going to go ahead and close on that one and take questions on relations.